Who can forget this? Hurricane Larry back in September, hitting eastern Newfoundland as a Category 1. Tornado devastating a neighborhood in Barrie, Ontario back in July. And those are just two of the top 10 weather events of 2021. A list compiled annually by my next guest, David Phillips, senior climatologist with Environment Canada. He's in Barrie, Ontario. Dave, it's always good to see you. Thank you for coming in to talk about this with me again this year.
You're so welcome, Heather. Always nice to be with you.
You know, maybe more important than ever, the opening statement of your report, Dave, really summed things up so powerfully. Not in 26 years of releasing the top 10 weather events has there been anything comparable to this year, where Canadians endured such a stream of weather extremes. It was
Truly
wild, Dave.
It was, Heather. I mean, I ran out of superlatives describing this. I mean, let's begin with the deadliest year for weather in Canadian history. How about the most destructive, and how about the most expensive year? I mean, all that wrapped up into 1 year, and it is just ahead. I mean, I'm worn out. I'm sure nature is too, but following what we have seen from coast to coast, some of the most extreme weather that we've had. If I did a top 10 weather stories of the 26 years I've been doing it, I'm sure 5 of them this year would have made that top 10.
Of all
and if
time.
we did a world list of top 10 in the world, I think there'd be a couple Canadian stories that would be near the top of that list.
Well, it's pretty extraordinary because your big stories were many of my big stories this year, and Canadians were conversant now with phrases like explosive cyclogenesis and atmospheric rivers in a way we perhaps weren't, Dave.
Well, exactly. I mean, who thought a heat dome? I mean, people thought we invented that. It was like putting the Rogers Centre or the BC dome over Western Canada, from the Arctic Circle right down to California. And we saw just a litany of weather extremes. Now the all-time Canadian high record that's closer to 50 degrees than the 45 degrees that it was back 84 years ago. It's now the second coldest country in the world can now say, well, we're warmer than any place in the United States outside of the desert Southwest, warmer than Las Vegas, Phoenix, any temperature in Europe or South America. It's the warmest temperature north of 45 degrees in the world. So, I mean, it was just incredible, the scorching temperatures, and in an area they don't have a lot of air conditioning. And it went on for 11 days. I mean, we broke records for the number of records we broke. And it was nonstop and lethal too.
I didn't mean to, but I've jumped right into your number one. So why we're going to go, I was going to count up. Now we're going to count down, okay? Because that was number one weather event of the year, that record heat under the dome. And you just explained why it was. All the records set, I mean, nearly 50 degrees and a contributing factor in hundreds of premature deaths, Dave.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, talk about 600. Heather, we established a royal commission when 2 people died from heat in Canada. I mean, we had 600 there, 200 in Alberta. I mean, and to think about 1 billion marine organisms died cooked in the hot waters of the Pacific. It was just out of this world kind of an event for us.
Lytton became such a focus too. I mean, and then it was also a big focal point in what was your number 2 story of the year. And let's go to that. You call it BC's flood of floods, the rain that began and just did not let up, Dave.
Absolutely. You know, Heather, the fall is the wettest season in British Columbia. It's the monsoon season. So not a surprise. But September and October were twice the normal rainfall, and November was even wetter. I mean, it's the wettest month on average. But the one weekend, they broke the all-time record for the month of November. I mean, it was nonstop. But, you know, Heather, it's interesting. That flooding would not have been the issue if it hadn't been for the heat and the drought and the fires in spring and summer. It kind of almost primed the land and the geography that it couldn't take a wet kind of fall. And then you have the wettest fall on record. So no wonder you had fertile lands flooded from as far as you could see, and just infrastructure just totally collapsing, and people just couldn't deal with it.
BC. Ground zero is how you refer to it in connection with this, not just in your top one, the heat dome, but also obviously in this flooding. Why is that, do you think? Any reasoning?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's, maybe bad luck. It's just the timing. It's just that I think there was a climate change influence of that. And I think what we saw is that impacts of or events, extremes of one season can impact you later on. It may not be that later on, may not be unusual, but it is that connection from one season and the drought. I mean, this wasn't out your window, Heather. I mean, this was like a 3 or 4 year cumulative effect of dry, and then it just sort of climaxed this particular year. Okay. And it wasn't just in British Columbia, although it was clearly there, but it stretched right across the country. And you talk about BC, they had the top 5 stories in Canada this year were from British Columbia, and 7 of the 10. I mean, I didn't realize that until I finished writing the piece. And then I realized, oh my gosh, what a punishing year it has been on British Columbia, Alberta, the West, and really there's no safe havens from extreme weather in Canada.
So record heat was the top, the BC flood of floods was number 2, and we did mention drought. So just one final point on that. In the West, again, as you described it, Dave, one of the worst in history.
Well, absolutely. I mean, farmers were talking about, oh, well, isn't this like 1988 or 1961? Historians were saying this was like the dirty 30s. It was the most widespread, the most intensely dry, and for long lasting. I mean, there was a statistic came from the Drought Center a week before harvesting said that 99% of the prairies was in a drought situation. That cost the economy billions of dollars and cost farmers their livelihood. I mean, it was just, we're paying higher prices for food because of that drought situation.
And supplies also not in as a great abundance. So I guess, we talk the weather, the actual weather conditions themselves, we know. We deal with extreme weather, we know that. And yet this year seemed to be more extreme than extreme. So the question is why? And to what degree, David, do you see climate change as factoring here?
I think it's important. And I think this year, really, millions of Canadians came to realize that, my gosh, there's a clear and present danger. And it's not just on the other side of the world or in the top of the world where we've always read or saw documentaries or read reports about the kind of slow motion, subtle, relentless warming in the north. We're seeing now in our backyards, in our communities, and we're shocked by the intensity, the impactfulness. I mean, this is Canada. I mean, we are really being beat up from these kind of extremes. And my hope is that this is the turning point, that the confirmation for a majority of Canadians will begin to see that this is something happening now. It's not something we have to wait for. It is a clear and present danger now, and our motivation is to do something about it. And what is so scary, Heather, is that people are saying, well, this may be a normal year in 2050. Normal? I mean, I just scared to think of what a year like this could do again. And yet this is maybe the new trend to what we're seeing more of, and we're not going to just have to wait to 2050. It's happening as we speak.
Now and here. Dave, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'd urge people to read the report. There is a fascinating material there, and as you suggest, frightening too in its implications. David Phillips, Senior Climatologist with Environment Canada. Thanks again.
Thank you, Heather.